Hello students, hope you're enjoying this ice day, staying home, frozen in. It's not as good as being in class, that's where I'd rather be with you, but we'll do our best. We're wrapping up the Great Divorce today, so hopefully at this point you've already completed that handout. We would have done that as a group in class, but do it independently and submit that. And I just want to pull out a few themes that came out in the last part of the Great Divorce, and we'll just kind of return to some of these ideas when we're back together and clear up any lasting confusions, I hope. If we've already talked about hell and judgment, then you can think about this last section as a reflection on heaven, or at least that's what I want us to think about. And another way of talking about that is a reflection on love. Now, if hell is a state of mind, if it's putting the nose in the corner, turning my back on others, facing the darkness, then heaven is also a state of mind, but it's a state of mind that is an openness to others, that is a movement into the light, into truth, into self-awareness and recognition of others. As we look at these different stories in the last section of the Great Divorce, a couple of things emerge, I think, and they're things that we've already talked a little bit about in class and we'll come back to. If God, as we've talked about God, is one characterized by letting us be. Remember, the divine power is not the power over, but it's power to let go, power to let us be who we are. Then likewise, our maturity comes as we learn to let each other be. So we humans have a nasty tendency to try to control each other, manipulate each other, even in fairly benign ways. Just trying to get people to do what we want them to do. Wash your dishes, pick up your socks in the dorm. Those may seem like reasonable things, but, sometimes we do that aggressively, sometimes passive-aggressively. As you live your life and you get into deeper relationships, you'll see this at a larger level, right? So we have these pitched battles sometimes with a spouse or parent. They can last for years. And part of it is we just want them to be what we want them to be. We want them to conform to our image of perfection or our image of who they need to be. And as I think comes out in a lot of these stories, what that image is it's in my mind. So I'm wanting you to be what I need you to be. Let me tell you about the kind of mom I need you to be. Let me tell you about the kind of husband I need you to be. Let me tell you about the kind of child I need you to be. And so we get what Lewis calls in his famous work on love, we get something called need-based love. My love for you is based on what you do for me. But as we've seen already, divine love is just the opposite of that. God has no needs. Heaven is the place where there is no need because there's the absolute confidence and trust that you are already loved. I don't need you to love me in this way or that. I don't need this emotional fulfillment. I am supremely confident that I am beloved and worthy of love. And it's connected, as we've already talked about, with the fact that I exist. My very existence is proof that I am loved. So loving is letting others be. It's a kind of detachment, if we wanted to use Buddhist language. It means I'm not imposing my will on you. And it's a freedom from need. What do we see in these stories, like the story of Pam and Michael, and the story of Robert's wife? Well, in both of these instances, there's a kind of love, right? A love for a parent and child, a love for a spouse, but there's something distorted about it. And it seems like that distortion could be described as possession. It's a possessive kind of love. I mean, look at Robert's wife. We don't get her name, but she is forever trying to make Robert into the person she thinks Robert needs to be. She's trying to conform Robert to her ideal of a husband so that she can make them into the kind of couple that she thinks they need to be. There's that social imaginary at play there. Robert, on the other hand, has found a kind of freedom here because he's able to become himself apart from his controlling wife. And so he refuses to come with her. And the story of Pam is similar. You may recall in the handout I asked you about this phrase that she says, I despise your God, I believe in a God of love. She says that on page 103. Well, this is a distortion. And again, we've talked about this many times. What she means by God of love may not be the same thing you mean by God of love. What she means by God of love is this nice God that Stephen Long talked about. It's this God that's for her. It's her view of love. She is obsessed with her child. And there's nothing wrong with a mother loving their child. In fact, it's one of the most beautiful and healthiest kinds of human love. And I think that's why Lewis includes it here. Because even the best of our loves can be warped and distorted. It's warped and distorted because it is disordered. We started to talk about this last time. It's disordered because she has come to love a relative love, her child, over anything absolute. In other words, she's made a relative or contingent love absolute. And she would rather have that than have this greater kind of love, which is the love of God. She doesn't see that in order to have true love, she has to let something go. That's the letting go or the letting be. In this case, it's not letting go of her ideal of the other, like it was with the wife. She needs to let go of her mental image of her husband. In the case of the mothering ghost, she has to let go of her image of herself as mother. Her identity is so locked into being a mother to Michael that she can't let Michael go, because otherwise who would she be? So she has to let go of herself. And letting go of an identity like that, especially a powerful identity such as motherhood, is one of the most difficult things of all. And that leads to the lizard story. This lizard story is really interesting because it's one of the few stories we get about real transformation. This is what it looks like for someone to change. This is what it looks like for someone to move towards the light. So recall this man has a reptile on his shoulder, and hopefully you figured out this reptile is a symbol for lust. He can't get over his sexual addiction, sexual desire, whatever that looks like. And this angel is trying to help him let that go. And he is afraid. And what's he afraid of? Well, he's afraid that it's going to hurt. He's afraid that he's going to lose who he is in some sense. And so you remember the angel says, I didn't promise it wouldn't hurt, only that it wouldn't kill you. And he has to let it go. Now the other side to letting go, letting go of himself, it's kind of like falling back. For me to let go of myself, my identity, my idea, means to put myself in the hands of another. He has to trust this angel. You go to the doctor, you have to trust the doctor. And this is all about learning to trust. Trust is me letting go of myself and moving out towards you. And what happens with the man? Well, the lizard is sort of sizzled off, but it's also transformed. Remember, nothing goes away. It's all changed. It's metamorphosed. So his sexual desire is not a bad thing. We're created with sexual desire. It's part of our biology, and it's given by God. But it's been disordered. It's been distorted. And so it has to be reordered. And once it's properly ordered, we see it for what it truly is, which is this beautiful, powerful thing, a stallion. The angel says, I think at the end of that, you can't go forward, you can't move towards the light when you have this. Nothing like this can enter into the presence of the light. And he says, not because they're too rank, that means not because it's too strong, but because it's too weak. So your disordered sexual desire is actually too weak to move forward. Remember our chart, right? As you move farther out, you get weaker, thinner, darker. Well, this disordered sexual desire is out there. It's less than it could be. So to move farther, we have to get the stronger kind of love, symbolized by that stallion. The word for this in classical language is virtue. You may have heard of the virtues. And literally, a virtue in Latin just means a strength, a power. So virtue is is life properly ordered, right? Wanting the right things in the right order. And the story of the man with the lizard is a visualization of what that looks like, of a person getting their desires properly ordered. The mothering ghost, Robert's wife, they're examples of disordered or twisted desire. So, very briefly, I'd like to retell a Bible story with this in mind, and then come back to a few things in Lewis at the very end. Specifically, the story of Sarah Smith and the dwarf and the tragedian. In the first few chapters of Genesis, we get the story of Adam and Eve and what's known as the fall. It's the story of sin in Christian theology. Humans were created, according to Genesis 1, in the image and likeness of God. And if I had the board, I would write image. And there are many ways to understand an image of God. But I would give this definition. Image is the capacity to love. So if God is love, the image of God means that we also are made to love, and we have the capacity to love. And this is in a different way than like a dog or a stone or a cloud can love. So there's something special about humans in the way they can love, connect to others, a certain kind of awareness. How we can talk about it in different ways. So image is this capacity to love. But then it says we're made in the image and likeness. And early Christian thinkers said, well, there's a reason there's two words. Image and likeness are different things. Image is the capacity, but the likeness is the degree to which that capacity is realized. So I am made to love, and I'm given the ability to love, and yet each of us loves to different degrees. Some of us are more loving, more open than others. So if we were to use an extreme example, Hitler is quite unloving, kills 6 million people based on bad reasons, ethnicity, and race. So Hitler would be an example of someone who's not very godlike. And on the other end, we could say Mother Teresa, who's devoted her life to serving lepers and the impoverished. She might be a very loving person, so she is more godlike. So both Hitler and Mother Teresa have the image of God. They both have the capacity to love, but that image is realized to different degrees. Hitler, not so much. Mother Teresa, very much. So Adam and Eve are created with this capacity, and they are on the road to maturity. So they're given the image, but they don't have the likeness yet. And that's because to become loving requires a lifetime. We have to practice being godlike. You're not just born loving, but our understanding of love comes through our experience, our suffering even. This is what divides us from God. God doesn't need that because God is absolute, and we are embodied and contingent. So our love comes precisely through our creatureliness, our contingency. Anyway, if you know this story, in Genesis 3, they're lounging in the garden, and the serpent appears to Eve, and the serpent says, you should eat this tree. This tree had previously been forbidden by God, but the serpent says, you should eat it. It looks good. It's beautiful. And Eve says, oh, we can't eat it. God says, we will die if we eat it. And the serpent says, no, you won't be God. In fact, you'll be like God. Your eyes will be opened. You'll know good from evil. And so Eve takes the fruit, she eats it, she gives it to her husband, and this is the story known as the fall. Now, there's a lot of questions perhaps around the story and who the serpent is and so on. But just focusing on what the serpent says in the story. You shall be like God. Was Eve wrong to want that? Was Eve wrong to want God-likeness? Well, I would argue she's not. In fact, that's what we're made to be, is God-like. So Eve's desires are properly oriented. She wants the right thing. She wants God-likeness. The problem in the story is she wants to take a shortcut to God-likeness. She wants to just eat the apple, take the potion, do the get-rich-quick course, instead of living a lifetime with Adam and her children and the tigers and unicorns and whatever in the garden, instead of living that out and learning how to love, she wants this shortcut. I want to be godlike, and I want it now. Some people have described the first sin as the sin of haste, getting in a hurry. She gives it to Adam. Adam also eats. Their eyes are opened. They want the right thing, but they want it in the wrong way. And that's a good way to describe sin. What's lust? It's wanting the right thing, sexual fulfillment, relationship, but wanting it in the wrong way. If you read the story in a superficial way, it looks like God comes down and punishes them for breaking a rule. And that's the way we teach it in Sunday school. But if you read it carefully, you'll notice that before God ever comes into the picture, there are a few consequences, a few natural consequences. So in the story, as soon as they eat the tree and their eyes are opened, you may remember they notice that they're naked. This is not something they had noticed before. They have a new kind of awareness of themselves, but it's not a healthy, positive awareness. In fact, they're ashamed of their nakedness. They cover themselves up. So this self-awareness is a kind of morbid self-awareness. It's a shameful thing. They learn shame for the first time. And they go and hide behind bushes. They hide out of shame, and they hide out of fear. For the first time, they're afraid of God. Now, did God make them afraid? No. Did God make them ashamed? No. These are ways that they have been distorted. So what is this kind of self-awareness or morbid self-awareness? Well, Augustine, who we're going to start reading next week, Augustine coined a little phrase to describe this. He says they turned inward. Incurvatus se. So after this event, trying to be godlike with a shortcut, they turn in on themselves. Curved inward. Incurvatus se in Latin. And I want to suggest we can read the other consequences in light of this inward curve. Because what this inward curve does, it's like seeing a straw in a glass of water. It's refracted or distorted. Their vision of God, of each other, of themselves and the world is now broken or distorted, just like that straw in the glass. And it's distorted because they're seeing the world through themselves and their needs, in Lewis's language, through them. What's for me? So, just to give you a quick analogy here, if you've ever gotten up on the wrong side of the bed, you know that even though your day looks the same as every other day, you experience it differently. Food at the calf tastes fine most days, but when I'm stressed and anxious, it may be awful, right? It's terrible. My roommate's alarm might go off in the same time every day, but if I haven't had much sleep the night before, then I'm going to be so annoyed. It's so terrible. They're always trying to, can't be responsible with their alarm. Campus looks absolutely beautiful on some days. Maybe after you've got accepted into club. But then when you're having relationship problems, it's so ugly here, and the grass is all dead, and blah, 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 the buildings. The way we perceive the world and perceive each other and treat each other has a lot to do with these mental states that we're in, right? And the more we're suffering or hurting because of stress, anxiety, hunger, emotional distress, the more we're going to be focused inward. We kind of shrink up into ourselves. I think I may have used this analogy in class. If you've ever had a toothache, all you can think about is your tooth. Your whole world shrinks to the size of your tooth or your mouth because it hurts so much. You just can't do anything else. Well, stress, anxiety, all these things can do the same thing. They pull us inward. And then we're seeing the world in this distorted way through our distress, through our anger, through our sadness, and so on. So what happens with Adam and Eve in the story? Well, there's the curse. And again, a superficial reading looks like God comes down and he makes life hard for Adam and Eve. He comes in and he curses the ground with thorns and thistles, makes Adam's work difficult. He comes in and curses Eve's body and says, your childbearing is going to be difficult. But if you stop and think about it for a minute, what does this actually mean? Does it mean that God has created this good and beautiful world and these good bodies, and then he reaches down in and he twists up Eve's fallopian tubes and he messes up her reproductive system so that now it's going to hurt her? And every woman that comes after is going to be in pain because of this one little decision she made? And likewise with the ground. God's made this good earth with all these good things. And now he comes in and he adds these nasty thorns and thistles and makes life hard. He destroys or ruins his creation just to spite Adam and Eve, to teach them a lesson. What if we think of it in terms of that distorted perspective? What if the earth already had thorns and thistles? They were always there. But now, when Adam goes out to hoe the garden, all he can think about are these stupid weeds and these stupid briars and these stupid stones. God must have just put these here to hurt me, to punish me. What's always been there, he now sees in a new way as somehow against him, in competition with him. What if Eve's reproductive system and childbearing capacity didn't change, was always the same? But now, as she goes through labor pains, instead of being able to focus on the joy of new life and the gift of a child, all she can think about is how much this hurts and how painful it is and how God made this stupid body and this stupid birth canal so small. Why can't it be different? She sees a distorted view of her own body. And think about how Adam and Eve view each other now. One of the aspects of the curse is the husband will be over the woman. He sees himself as more powerful, more important. A woman becomes the inferior one. So they look at each other now not as equals, but as superior and inferior, hierarchically. We've already seen how there's blaming going on. When God says, "Who did this?" And Adam says, "The woman you gave me, she tempted me." So they're throwing each other under the bus. They distrust each other. So instead of seeing each other for who they are, instead of seeing each other as a gift, they get this distorted view because now they see it through their broken lens, their neediness. And even their view of God. So we talked about their view of nature, their view of themselves, their own bodies, their view of each other in relationships. What about their view of God? Well, I would suggest that the whole reading of Genesis 3 shows a distorted perspective of God. Now, hear me out on this. One way of reading this story leaves us with a God who is angry and offended and punishing, a very judgmental God who kicks them out of the garden, kicks them out of paradise. And we're left with a view of God who is actually more of a Satan figure. And it leaves humans in a position to say, well, it's actually God's fault. God's the one who kicked us out of the garden. God's the one who made our lives hard. This is all on God. And humans have a way out. They don't have to take responsibility for this distortion. They don't have to take responsibility for their warped view of the world. They can just blame God for doing it all. And the reason I feel somewhat confident in this interpretation is because I think Jesus gives a different version of the creation story when he tells the parable of the prodigal son. This is in the New Testament. This is in the Gospel of Luke. This is a very famous parable, so I assume that some of you are familiar with it. It's about a son who gets sort of sick and tired of his family. He wants to set out on his own. He asks his father for his inheritance money. Remember, you don't get an inheritance until you die. So basically, he's telling his father, I wish you were already dead so I could have my money. And the father graciously says, well, I'll just go ahead and divide it up and give you your share. The son leaves home. He goes and he spends all the money. Once the money's gone, his friends leave him. He finds himself working in a pigsty, like a slave. And he remembers his father's house, and he says, if only I hadn't left, maybe my father will take me back. I'll just tell him I'll be his slave. It's better to be his slave than work in this pigsty. So he returns home. His father sees him from afar off, runs to meet him, embraces him, gives him a robe and a ring, throws a party, forgives him, accepts him back, welcomes him in. This is a different way of seeing God. If you compare Genesis 3 vision of God to the prodigal son story, if this father is meant to be a vision of God, the story Jesus tells is quite different from the version we get in Genesis. This is not a God who's going to punish the son for running away. This is not a God who is offended because the son has rebelled and turned his back on him. This is a God who is waiting patiently for the son to take responsibility and to return. I think that Jesus gives us a clearer vision of God, a truer vision of God, a God who's not angry and upset, a God who's not kicking us out. I think the truth is, all along, God didn't kick us out. The truth is we left of our own free will. We turned our backs on God. God didn't turn his back on us. God, in fact, is waiting to welcome us back, as in the story of the prodigal son, to forgive us, to celebrate even, and to remember our sin and our transgression no more. So the distortion of sin even affects our relationship to God, where we see God as against us, when in fact God has always been for us, never against us. These are all examples, I think, of what David Foster Wallace meant by the skull-sized kingdom. Remember, he said we get locked into our skull-sized kingdom. And just to think back to what we've done the last few weeks, that skull-sized kingdom can be talked about in different ways. I can think of my skull-sized kingdom as my country, nationalism, America in our case. Or I can think about it as my ideology, capitalism, if we're talking about economics. Or I can think about it in terms of even my religion. It's about me. Or my race. We talked about white supremacy. Or just the nice God, who is the God who exists for me, to benefit me and serve me, and so on. This is me trapped in my skull-sized kingdom. This is me seeing the world through the distorted lenses of nationalism and ideology and any other kind of thing like that. My stuff. Instead of just actually seeing and taking the world in for what it is. We don't need to be saved from God, or from nature, or from some external enemy. What we need to be saved from is ourselves. We need our desire reoriented. We need to learn to trust again, because that's what's been broken. So to go to that last story in The Great Divorce, the story of Sarah and the tragedian, hopefully you saw that this image of the tragedian and the dwarf, I think you reflected on this for your reading response, that's actually one person. And this person is divided. This is the divided self. And this is a biblical image of the human condition. Is we are divided between a true self, the true self with the capacity to love, made in the image of God, and then this false self. Remember, a tragedian is an actor, someone who wears a mask. And that actor is seeking pity. Love me, love me. It's a need-based love. Now what Sarah's trying to do is to find the real person that she knew, to get beyond the actor, beyond the mask, and to say, you don't actually need my love. You think you do, but you are already beloved and already worthy. God loves you. Remember, Sarah says, I've found true love. There is no need anymore. So this tragedian, again, is an image of who we are, divided and projecting this false image. Salvation looks like learning to be confident, learning to trust that we are beloved. The problem is you can't just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You can't just decide, okay, I'm going to believe I'm beloved. This is a struggle for a lot of us. A struggle to see that we're genuinely worthy. A struggle to cut through the insults, the nasty comments, the biting jokes that we hear in person and online. We need a model of what true love looks like. We need to see this kind of trust embodied. We need to see that it's not going to kill us to let go of the false images, the masks, And this is the story of Jesus. And Lewis kind of alludes to this there at the end. There's one who was able to shrink small enough. There's one who trusted enough to let go completely of his life and enter into hell in order to deliver others. This is the model in our own hell, in our state of mind. We can't save ourselves. We can't just get out of that corner. But someone has come to us. This is the Christian story. God has come to us and shown us what this true love looks like. A love that's not based on my need, but a love that is oriented towards others, that's fully open to the world, that's fully open to God. What the cross, the crucifixion story is all about is the story of a God who is with us. It's the story of a God who lets us be who we are in a radical way. A God who doesn't defend God's self. A God who allows his murderers to be who they are. You come at me with a sword, a knife, a gun. I'm going to let you be that. I'm going to let you be a murderer if it kills me. Even if it kills me. This is a kind of takeaway from the Christian story. It's a paradox at the heart of Christianity. To be human is to be a lover, to have the capacity to love, to be in the image of God. But to love in a fallen human world is to die. To open ourselves up fully in a broken world, to trust people, is going to mean heartbreak. We're going to get taken advantage of. We're going to suffer for this love. And that's just the paradox. We have to love. We need each other. We have to get out of ourselves and see beyond our own needs. But it's not going to be easy. You can't just pluck a fruit and be done with it. We have to live through this. But the story of Jesus gives us hope and confidence. It empowers us with this kind of divine power, which is not control, which is not making the world what I want it to be. It's not even making my life what I want it to be. But it's the power to let go of my ideals, to let go of my desire for you, and to just be, and to just delight, and to find joy, even in the face of hardship and difficulty and heartbreak. Because on the other side of death and suffering, there is new life, greater life. And the extent to which we can already start living that now is the extent to which we're already in the presence of God and we're already in heaven. Like hell, heaven is not a place or a time after this time. But insofar as we're able to live the life of love now, open to others and open to the world, we are already living into the presence of God. We're already in heaven in a very real sense. Well, thanks for your attention. The attendance code for today is 2504. 2504. Make sure you enter that so that you get credit. And hopefully we'll be back together next week. We can touch on a few of these points. And then we'll be moving into Augustine's Confessions. So do get started reading that. I hope that you found a good translation. Don't go with an old translation. Some online are really hard to read. Find a good new translation. There's no shortage of them. I gave one to you in the syllabus. You can use others as well, just as long as it's modern and readable. So we'll talk about who Augustine is and think about why we're reading this old book when we come together next week. In the meantime, be safe, stay warm.